I found my husband in our bed with my best friend on a Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't supposed to be home. I had a dentist appointment that got cancelled at the last minute, and I decided to come back instead of running errands. I walked into my own bedroom and saw them together. My husband, of 23 years, my best friend of 15. They didn't even hear me open the door. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably 10 seconds. Then I backed out, closed the door quietly, and walked downstairs. I sat in my car in the driveway and stared at the steering wheel. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't turn the key. His name was David. Her name was Kelly. And I had trusted both of them with everything I had. We'd been married since I was 25. David worked in sales, made decent money, and we'd built what I thought was a solid life. We had a son, Marcus, who was away at college. The house was paid off. We had savings. I'd worked part-time as a bookkeeper for years, nothing glamorous, but it gave me independence and something to do after Marcus left for school. Kelly had been my closest friend since we met at a PTA meeting when our kids were in elementary school. Her marriage had fallen apart 5 years ago, and I was the one who helped her through it. I let her stay with us for 2 months when she had nowhere else to go. I co-signed a loan for her when her credit was bad. I was there for every late night phone call, every breakdown, every moment she needed someone. That Tuesday afternoon, after I finally drove away from my house, I checked into a hotel. I paid cash. I didn't tell anyone where I was. I just needed one night to think without seeing either of their faces. David called my phone 17 times that evening. Kelly called 4 times. I didn't answer. I sat on the hotel bed and tried to figure out what I was going to do. The next morning I went home. David was in the kitchen drinking coffee, like nothing had happened. He looked up when I walked in and I saw something in his face. Not guilt exactly, more like calculation. "We need to talk," he said. I poured myself coffee and sat down across from him. He told me it had been going on for 8 months. He said he didn't mean for it to happen. He said Kelly understood him in ways I didn't anymore. He said he wanted a divorce, but he wanted to do it amicably, for Marcus's sake. I asked him if Kelly was going to move in here. He hesitated. Then he said, eventually, yes. I drank my coffee and nodded. I told him I needed time to process this. He looked relieved. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already started planning. I knew David. I knew how he thought, how he operated, what mattered to him, and I knew our finances better than he did because I'd been managing them for years. He made the money, but I paid the bills, tracked the accounts, handled the paperwork. I also knew Kelly. I knew she was broke, always had been. I knew she was looking for security, for someone to take care of her. I knew exactly why she'd chosen my husband. Over the next week, I played the part of the devastated wife trying to hold things together. I cried at the right moments. I asked David if we could try counseling. He said no, his mind was made up, but he appreciated that I was being reasonable about everything. Kelly stopped calling me. I didn't reach out to her either. As far as anyone knew, I was just trying to cope with my marriage falling apart. But I was doing other things too. I made copies of every financial document we had: bank statements, investment accounts, retirement funds, tax returns going back 7 years. I photographed everything and stored it in a cloud account David didn't know existed. I went through our house and catalogued every item of value. I took pictures of everything, furniture, electronics, my grandmother's china, the artwork we'd collected, all of it. I opened a bank account in my name only at a different bank. I started redirecting my paychecks there, and I hired a lawyer, not someone local, someone from 2 towns over. A woman named Patricia, who came highly recommended and had a reputation for being thorough and ruthless when necessary. Patricia looked through everything I brought her. She didn't say much at first, just made notes and asked questions. Then she looked up at me and said, "He doesn't know you're here." "No," I said. "Good," she said. "Don't tell him, not yet." David started staying out later. Some nights he didn't come home at all. When I asked where he'd been, he said he was staying at a friend's place, that we needed space. I knew he was with Kelly. I didn't argue. He started talking about the divorce like it was already settled. He'd say things like, "when we sell the house," or "once everything's divided up." He was so confident about how it would all go. One night, about 3 weeks after I'd found them together, David told me he'd talked to a lawyer just to get some preliminary information, he said. He wanted to make sure we did this fairly. I nodded and asked what the lawyer had said. David explained that in our state, everything would be split 50-50. The house, the savings, his retirement account, all of it. He said we'd probably need to sell the house because neither of us could afford to buy the other one out. I asked him if he'd already filed anything. He said no, not yet. He wanted us to agree on terms first. I told him that sounded reasonable. What David didn't know was that his preliminary conversation with a lawyer had been with someone who worked at the same firm as one of Patricia's regular opponents. Word got back to Patricia within 2 days. She knew which attorney he'd talked to and exactly what advice David had been given. Patricia called me and said, "He's going to file within the next 2 weeks. Be ready." I asked her what I should do. She said, "Nothing. Let him file first. It'll work in our favor." Marcus called me during this time. He'd heard from his father that we were having problems. David had called him, framed it as a mutual decision, said we'd both agreed we'd grown apart. I didn't correct the story. I just told Marcus I loved him and that none of this was his fault. He said he knew that, but I could hear the confusion in his voice. He asked if there was any chance we'd work it out. I said I didn't think so. He asked if I was okay. I lied and said yes. Kelly sent me a text message 4 weeks after I'd caught them. It was long, full of apologies and explanations. She said she never meant to hurt me. She said she and David had fallen in love and she hoped someday I could understand. She said she wanted us to eventually be friends again because our friendship had meant so much to her. I read it 3 times. Then I deleted it and blocked her number. David filed for divorce 6 weeks after that Tuesday afternoon. He had the papers served to me at work, which I thought was a calculated move to humiliate me. My co-workers saw the process server hand me the envelope. Everyone knew what it was. I took the papers to Patricia that same day. She read through them and smiled. He's represented himself on these. He didn't use his lawyer. I asked what that meant. She said it meant he was cocky and cheap. He thought this would be simple enough that he didn't need to pay for legal representation through the whole process. That's good for us, she said. I filed my response 2 weeks later. Patricia had prepared everything. David's petition had asked for a 50-50 split of assets and had listed the house, our savings accounts, and his 401k. My response agreed to the divorce, but contested the asset division. Because here's what David had forgotten, or maybe never knew. I had inherited money from my mother when she died 6 years ago, about $80,000. I deposited it into our joint savings account because that's where our money went. I never thought about it as mine versus his. It was just ours. But legally, inherited money is separate property. It doesn't get divided in a divorce unless it's been commingled in a way that makes it impossible to trace. I'd kept records. I had the deposit slip, the documentation from my mother's estate, everything. And I'd made sure, with Patricia's help, that we could trace exactly how that money had moved through our accounts. Patricia filed a motion to have that. Patricia, $80,000 classified as my separate property. David called me the day he got the notification. He was furious. "You can't do this," he said. "That money's been in our account for years. It's marital property." I told him to talk to his lawyer. He said he didn't need a lawyer for this. I was being unreasonable. I hung up. 2 days later, David hired an attorney, the same one he'd consulted with initially. The firm sent a letter to Patricia arguing that the inheritance had been commingled and should be split. Patricia sent back a 20-page response with documentation proving the money could be traced and that under state law, it remained my separate property. David's lawyer backed down, but that was just the beginning. Patricia went through every asset we had with a fine-tooth comb. The house had been purchased 12 years ago. We'd used money from my father's life insurance policy as part of the down payment. $15,000. I had records of that too. Patricia argued that I should be credited with that $15,000 in the division of assets. David's lawyer fought it, but we had the documentation. Eventually they agreed. Then there was David's 401k. He'd been contributing to it for 20 years, but the account had grown significantly in the last 5 years because of stock market gains. Patricia hired a forensic accountant to calculate exactly what portion of those gains had occurred during the marriage versus before, and what portion was due to market performance versus David's contributions. It got complicated. David's legal bills started piling up. We went through mediation. David and his lawyer sat on one side of the table. Patricia and I sat on the other. A mediator tried to get us to reach an agreement. David wanted me to take less than half of his retirement account. He argued that he'd earned it, that I'd only worked part-time, that it wasn't fair for me to get half of something I hadn't contributed to. Patricia pointed out that my part-time work had allowed me to manage our household, raise our son, and support David's career. She cited case law. She made it clear that if we went to trial, a judge would likely give me exactly what I was asking for, and it would cost David a lot more in legal fees to get there. David's face got red. He leaned across the table and said, "You're doing this to punish me." I looked at him calmly and said, "I'm doing this because it's what I'm entitled to." We didn't reach an agreement that day. Around this time, Kelly started showing up places. I'd see her car parked outside David's friend's house, where I assumed he was staying. I saw them together at a restaurant once through the window as I drove past. She'd lost weight. She looked happy. It made something twist in my chest, but I didn't let it stop me. The divorce dragged on for months. Every time David's lawyer proposed a settlement, Patricia found something wrong with it. She wasn't being difficult. For the sake of it, she was protecting my interests. But it was making David increasingly desperate. His legal bills had gone past $15,000. Mine were being paid from the account I'd set up. the one with my paychecks, and Patricia had agreed to take a portion of her fee from the final settlement. David called me directly against his lawyer's advice. He said we needed to stop this. He said we were both losing money to attorneys and we should just agree to split everything down the middle and be done with it. I told him I'd agree to that if he agreed to give me the $80,000 inheritance as my separate property, credit me for the $15,000 down payment, and split his 401k 50-50. He said that wasn't splitting down the middle. I said it was. He just didn't like the math. He hung up on me. Another month passed. We were approaching the 10-month mark since I'd found them together. Marcus came home for Thanksgiving. He stayed with me, not with David. When I asked him why, he said Dad was living in a small apartment with Kelly and there wasn't room for him. That hurt Marcus more than he let on. I could see it. We had Thanksgiving dinner, just the two of us. Marcus asked me what was taking so long with the divorce. I told him these things take time. He said Dad was stressed about money. He'd asked Marcus if he could take out student loans for his last semester instead of David paying for it like they'd planned. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I asked Marcus how much the semester cost. He said about $12,000. I told him I'd pay for it. He didn't need to take out loans. Marcus looked at me with surprise. He said, "You have that kind of money?" I said I did. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd been working extra hours, picking up side bookkeeping jobs, and saving every penny in preparation for exactly this kind of thing. I'd also made sure that my lawyer knew about Marcus's college expenses and that they'd be factored into the final settlement. David found out I'd paid for Marcus's semester. When Marcus thanked him for offering but said it was taken care of, David called me, angrier than I'd ever heard him. "You're turning my son against me," he said. I said, "I paid for his school. That's not turning him against you. That's being his mother." "You're trying to make me look bad," he said. "You're doing that yourself," I said, and hung up. In December, almost a year after I'd caught them, David's lawyer contacted Patricia with a new settlement offer. David would agree to my terms on the inheritance and the down payment credit. He'd agree to a 50-50 split of the 401k. In exchange, he wanted to keep the house. Patricia called me and explained the offer. She said the house was worth about $350,000 and we still owed $120,000 on the mortgage. If David kept it, he'd need to buy out my share of the equity, which would be about $115,000. I asked if he could afford that. She said probably not without taking a loan or refinancing. And with his current legal bills and the fact that he was already stretched thin financially, it would be difficult. I told her to accept the offer with one condition. David had to pay me the buyout within 90 days, or the house would be sold and we'd split the proceeds. Patricia sent the counteroffer. David agreed. I knew he couldn't pay me $115,000 in 90 days, but I wanted to see him try. The divorce was finalized in January, almost exactly 1 year after that Tuesday afternoon. The judge signed off on everything. I got my inheritance, my down payment credit, half of David's retirement account, and the right to either receive a buyout payment for the house or force a sale. I also got half of the value of our other assets, including furniture and electronics, which came to about $18,000. David owed me that too. All told, he owed me around $213,000 within 90 days. I waited. David tried. I'll give him that. He went to banks, tried to refinance, tried to get a personal loan. But his credit was maxed out from the legal fees, and he didn't have the income to support the kind of loan he needed. Kelly couldn't help him. She was still broke. On day 87, David's lawyer contacted Patricia and asked for an extension. Patricia said no. On day 90, David hadn't paid. Patricia filed to force the sale of the house. David fought it, but the agreement was clear. He'd had 90 days. He hadn't paid. The house had to be sold. We listed it in February. It sold in 3 weeks for $360,000. After paying off the mortgage and the realtor fees, we each walked away with about $110,000. David also still owed me the $18,000 for the other assets. He paid it in installments over 6 months because that's all he could manage. Kelly left him 4 months after the house sold. I heard about it through Marcus, who'd heard it from one of David's friends. Apparently, the financial stress had been too much for her. She'd thought David had money, that they'd be comfortable. When she realized he was basically starting over at 50 years old with nothing but debt and a reduced retirement account, she decided she couldn't do it. She moved to another state. I never saw her again. David ended up in a small rental apartment. He still works in sales, but I heard he's not doing as well as he used to. Marcus sees him occasionally, but their relationship isn't what it was. Marcus graduated college last year. I was there. David was too, but we didn't speak. I used some of the settlement money to buy a small house for myself. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. I put the rest in investments and savings. I still work as a bookkeeper, and I'm doing fine. I don't hate David anymore. I don't hate Kelly either. Mostly, I just don't think about them. But sometimes I tinker about that Tuesday afternoon, standing in my bedroom doorway, watching my life fall apart. And I think about the choice I made not to scream, not to break down, but to walk away and plan. I learned something about myself that year. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. I learned that patience can be more powerful than anger. And I learned that when someone betrays you, the best revenge isn't dramatic or loud. Sometimes it's just making sure you get exactly what you're entitled to and not one bit less. If this story meant something to you, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, you can subscribe. I'd also love to know, have you ever had to stand up for yourself when someone you trusted let you down? You can share in the comments if you'd like.